Welcome and thank you for tuning in to Jazz and Gender in the Era of Black Lives Matter. This is part 3 of a 3-panel series, Jazz in the Era of Black Lives Matter, curated by myself and Naomi Extra. For today's interview, we welcome scholar Dr. Tammy Kernodle. Tammy is a professor of musicology at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, where she teaches in the areas of African American music, popular and classical, American music, and gender studies in music. She's worked closely with a number of educational programs, including the Kennedy Center's Mary Lou Williams Women in Jazz Festival, Jazz at Lincoln Center, NPR, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame lecture series, and the BBC. Her work has appeared in numerous anthologies. She's an author of the biography Soul on Soul, The Life and Music of Mary Lou Williams, and has served as the associate editor of the 3-volume Encyclopedia of African American Music. So we welcome Tammy Kernodle. We also have with us bassist, vocalist, producer, and now filmmaker Mimi Jones. She's toured extensively throughout Africa, Asia, Europe, South America, and the Caribbean islands, and is recognized as a U.S. jazz ambassador. Mimi is an award-winning bassist and has worked vastly as a sidewoman with many legendary and contemporary musicians. She has 3 recordings as a leader under her own label, Hot Tone Music. We also welcome Samora Pinderhughes, who's a composer, pianist, vocalist, known for striking intimacy and radically honest lyrics alongside high-level musicianship. He's also known for his use of music to examine social political issues and fight for change. He's collaborated with artists across boundaries and scenes. Samora is the first ever Art for Justice Soros Justice Fellow, and was also awarded the Chamber Music America's 2020 Visionary Award. He's also a Sundance Composer Lab Fellow. Samora scored the award-winning documentary Whose Streets, and he's currently getting his PhD at Harvard University. So you can find out more about each of these panelists online, so we encourage you to check them out. One last thing, we want to hear your thoughts and questions, so feel free to tweet us using the hashtag Jazz in the Era of BLM. And we also want to give a big shout out to the National Jazz Museum in Harlem for sponsoring these events. And so you can check out their website as well for more upcoming events. And I'd like to just give you all a little backstory on the series before we begin. The idea for this series came out of a series of conversations that my wife and I, Naomi, we had began having back in 2012 after Trayvon Martin was killed. And again in 2014 when Mike Brown was murdered by the police and left in the streets. We paid attention to some of the organizing that was emerging in places like Florida, Chicago, New York, Florida, and we began to talk about how to connect these conversations about social justice to some of the concepts that informed the Black Lives Matter movement. And we found that far too often, conversations around jazz and social justice completely ignored or was disengaged from the BLM movement. So for today's panel, we really want to explore some of the most pressing issues in jazz and gender within the context of the movement for Black lives.
All right, so I'm gonna throw out the first question, kind of related to the framework of this panel. So I'd like to ask you to just kind of reflect on how Black Lives Matter has shaped conversations around jazz and gender, social justice in this moment, in recent years, if at all, right? So I'm not, or if you don't think that it has, and then what does it look like? What's at stake here? So what do y'all think?
First victim. Wow. Well, I mean, I'm just going to jump in just to break the ice, so I don't feel nervous because I'm really excited to be here. You know, when I hear the credits read off of everybody's accolades, it just sounds so amazing, and you know, I'm just thrilled that you guys called me to join this group. Um, but definitely, music is so powerful. You know, it hits your consciousness, but it hits your subconsciousness. It sets you in a mood and a tone, and just depending on just hearing lyrics and frequencies and things like that. You know, it could either calm you down, rev you up. um, so I think first of all, I think it's just really important to be mindful of what you're pumping in your ears, and jazz, it's a beautiful music because it's not like that of classical where you kind of have like a structure that you keep the same way. Although there is a definite structure, you're free to have this expression, and this voice, um, that throughout time has represented a lot of times what's going on in the world. And, many jazz musicians at some point were looked upon as, you know, as part of the protest, as part of the voices of what was going on and supporting, you know, just change, and I think it's really, really important just to, I don't know, be able to have a platform where you could either decompress, you can release, or because you have something to say, there's a space to have something to say. It's also paired up with spoken word, poetry, hip hop, those kind of things. They're cousins. Um, and so leading into the hip hop and into lyrics and things like that, that even becomes more important, that what's being fed and what's being said, you know what I mean, is something that is going to work for the betterment of our communities and our society. And I don't know, being, inclusive to a certain point. And I know we're going to get to some of that, so I'm not going to go too far deep into who's supposed to be saying what and doing what. But I do feel like the music is super powerful. It transcends us. It sends us into places where we normally can't physically go. You
Mimi,
know.
I want to thank you for that. I want to just kind of like break down another layer, right? So we've heard this narrative as jazz as protest music, right? We also know that black feminism is the bedrock of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm just going to be blunt and put it out there. I've gone to panels, so, jazz and gender, jazz and social justice that they don't deal with race, and they're not really dealing with they're dealing with gender in these really, really narrow terms. So my question that I really want us to think about is how, in this moment and recently, how is the music responding to this major political movement, right? Is it even responding? Are we acknowledging the fact that BLM was started by three Black queer women, right? So where are the conversations going there? Yes, I see some facials, so go ahead, please.
I'm
My
agreeing
answer
with
is
her.
no. I think of all the musical genres, jazz has been very slow to do the very thing that you're talking about. That jazz has not enlarged the conversation about gender identity, nor the where the voices and the experiences of Black women or women of color, period, fit into all of this. I come from this perspective from two different sides, right? So one as an academician, one who is teaching jazz history in the classroom, right? But also someone who is engaged in jazz scholarship, who's trying to widen what is this historical narrative. And what's really surprising to me is I've seen jazz artists who are writing pieces and commemorating like Eric Garner's death, or, reflecting on these things, but I don't hear the same thing happening in terms of Black women, and let alone queer people. So we're not even going to talk about the number of trans women, Black trans women who have been killed, because that's not even a part of our conversation about this marginalization. We keep them invisible, we keep them muted because they don't fit into what is this framework of inclusivity, right? And who belongs in the canon, and who just belongs, period, in this, right? We're still trying to get women into the framework as a norm anyway. So let alone when we add these other complexities. And that's what's really sad about it, because jazz in some respects, because it is seen as a music that is embraced by some of the people who have the deepest power base to make changes, right? Is they're not having those conversations, right? And what I'm saying is, that jazz is really embraced by a lot of white people, a lot of wealthy white people. It's our music too, but more so, it's still a marker of a certain cultural and economic background, right? And so we have the power to transform those individuals' minds by what we do as musicians and scholars and educators, but we're not having that inclusive conversation because we're still filtering this great man theory, right? And these same tropes and narratives in the music. So an Eric Garner is going to be raised as a voice, and I'm not saying he shouldn't, but a Breonna Taylor will not be, a Sandra Bryant. Where are these women's stories within the context of new jazz compositions that we see coming forward?
Yeah, Samora, get in there. I know you have thoughts.
I think there are some folks. I would say of all the records that have come out in the last 2 years, that would fall under the category of Black creative improvised music. Terry Lynn Carrington's record was the most impactful to me. And I don't think that that's a mistake. I think it's because she is deeply connected to folks and has deep political friendships and real friendships with folks like Angela Davis. Um, and you can tell in her music. And so for me, I think it comes down to a few things. I think the reality is that, and those things are connected. One is that the space, particularly in terms of the industry itself, but also the community, is very male dominated, as we know, and as a result, both culturally and like financially and fiscally, it's very patriarchal in nature, and it can be very misogynist in nature. So those are things that we have to break down. I also think there's just a lack of political education, and that's where I really do, where I bring up the Terry Lynn example particularly. And I don't say that. I always want to clarify to say that to say that certain people are smarter than others, or that is because you read more than others. That means, experience is a form of knowledge as well. But I do think that when it comes to what we choose to intake, it happens to be that the same gaps in the conversation are the gaps in our political education. So we read Malcolm X, but we don't read the Combahee River Collective, right? And that is and that is the result of what happens. We and as you said, as these mass movements happen, almost all of which are always started by Black queer folks, women of color, all around the country, and also poor folks, because these conversations and spaces can often become issues of class as well. They become filtered through the mainstream, and then as a result, they 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 can be co-opted in a lot of different ways, right? And as a result, there are a lot of situations in which the the concepts themselves can be divorced from both the people that created them and also the very core of what they're there for. And so obviously, to use an example, I mean, I'm an abolitionist, and I've been very influenced by the uprising, as we all have, I'm sure, this summer. Um, and I've been doing a lot of reading myself, trying to educate myself. And as I read abolitionist texts, all the core abolitionist thinkers that I am the most influenced by are all women: Miriam Kaba, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, Angela Davis, as I mentioned. And so, if you go to the source, so to speak, there's no mistaking, where the real is, so to speak. But I think as things grow, they become easier and easier to be co-opted.
Thank you for that, Samora. I just want to linger just really quickly before we go on and Jerome poses the next question of just this connection you made between Terry Lynn Carrington and Angela Davis and like having an active relationship. And that's something that I see as a really kind of, if you think about, like, for example, Nina Simone and Lorraine Hansberry and that relationship, right? Where are these
Very
relationships?
lacking.
And I know that you have relationships with organizers and, where are these relationships with, writers, thinkers, scholars among jazz musicians? Is that something that we should be working on, or what do you all think?
I definitely think we're lacking. The two categories need to come together, young and old. We live in a generation where there's a gap between who we look up to. I mean, in jazz itself, just as a teacher, so many of my students don't even know who really created what. It's like a sample, and also that respect, to these African American people who work so hard to. They have no clue where that came from or what it was inspired by, you know, back when, like a Max Roach, or like they're just clueless of like what that is, but they will take a sound and build off of that and then think that like a modern day musician created it. So I definitely think there's a gap between our elders and like our younger generations coming up now, um as far as musicians go. um Samora, you seem very, very well read and studied, and I just feel like unfortunately not everybody in the music business, or you know is making time to read or understand who did what, and they almost don't care. You know what I mean? So I think we're definitely lacking on that. And I also wanted to say, sometimes this topic of like how you said, African American women, queer folk, how they don't fit in. Sometimes there's like, this is what I've heard. There's a budget that comes from somewhere, and there are names that go on a plaque on a wall to say, these people have sponsored this uh concert series, or this club or whatever. And if you raise too much controversy, or it doesn't look the right fit or picture, then they may not get the funding again. So there's a whole thing that goes, a whole, I guess, political thing that goes with that, in the world of the arts, that you want to keep it nice and neat. You may not want to know that, like, some of this music, it wasn't just like party music, like an Abby Lincoln and that kind of sound. Oh, she's a beautiful singer, she was so beautiful, but like, let's really think about what she was saying and what they were singing about. So I definitely think there's a gap, to answer your question, between the activists, and like, so many people in the music industry didn't even know who John Lewis was, or what he did, or and I'm not saying everybody's like that, but I think it's part of the culture which has been separated from the music in a sense. Um, so I don't know. That's kind of my take.
But I think we don't have a desire to have the same level of intellectual exchange that we saw in the 50s and 60s and 70s, right? Nina Simone met a Lorraine Hansberry because of these collectives that came in these nightclubs, and they were centrally located, and people were interested in having real conversations. And I'm not sure if we're really interested in moving outside of our social circles to have real conversations with people that might could challenge us, right? Because Nina Simone didn't have the progressive political perspective that we associate with her when she initially came to New York, in the late 50s and 60s. That's really fueled by her friendship with Langston Hughes and with Lorraine Hansberry, but being around Miriam Makeba, meeting Odetta, James Baldwin. So when you think about all of these people and they're just having conversations and they're listening. And I know from my own personal research of Nina Simone, just like Samora was talking about reading, she writes in letters and talks about Langston Hughes giving her books and her taking the time to really read those books, being challenged by those books, because those books really opened her up to a perspective about even Blackness that she wasn't even aware of, as a woman who was raised in the South, and coming. And so I don't know if we're just not having those conversations because we didn't have the opportunity, or we didn't want those same kind of conversations, anymore. um and I think maybe that's the positive thing we can take out of COVID, is these kind of discussions, right?
Right.
These kind of engagements, because I've seen so much more of that in this era. So, if there's something I think that can be said about this pandemic, it has allowed us to stop and reflect, but also use technology to engage with each other in very different ways. And so hopefully we can see those kind of things coming forward.
No, it's interesting, Tammy. What I hear you saying to me, is that there's a lack of respect for scholarship, right? And those, I feel like that's where we're at in our music here in jazz music. Mimi spoke to Abby Lincoln, for instance. I mean, her and Max Roach, they put music to when Melindy sings. Paul Laurence Dunbar. So they were, and they never met him because he was long gone by the time. So they were interested in the canon of Black scholarship and excellence, not just musical, but published works, right? Published literature.
Yeah. But Jerome, can I say something? Because we
Yes.
keep bringing up, Max Roach and Abby. And Max Roach and Abby Lincoln turned their apartment was a salon.
Mm.
Poets and writers. If you look at the history of their apartment during the late 50s and early 60s, it was a meeting place for activists. It was a meeting place for writers and authors and playwrights, and the same kind of culture that was in the 40s with like Mary Lou Williams' apartment, or Yale Walker's Dark Tower, in Harlem, in the midst of the Harlem Renaissance, and that salon culture where Black intellectuals, and that term intellectual had a really holistic kind of definition. That's what was happening in the 50s and 60s. So, just as you're saying, that Oscar Brown, it's not by chance that he's in those circles, right? And so I think what you're speaking to is we don't cultivate a Black intellectual culture anymore. And that's, it's not this, it goes back to what Samora said. It's not about being smart or not smart, right? But it's seeking knowledge, and it's seeking beyond that just might interest you, right? There's a point in time where generationally, I'm not going to date myself, even though my hair probably does. Generationally, there were certain things that you knew because they were part of your curriculum of public school. You knew certain things about Black history. You knew certain things about American history, whether you wanted to know them or not, right? But I don't feel like we oftentimes really stress the need to go beyond the kind of bite-sized pieces of information that we get, right? From the Wikipedia culture in some ways. And Wiki is good for certain things, but we don't go deeper than that, right? We want the encapsulated versions, and we don't necessarily look beyond those things, to have an intellectual culture.
Well, it's interesting, Tammy. Your book, Soul to Soul, is actually I think it's groundbreaking. I think it should be essential readings in all programs, and everybody should check that book out. And one thing that really stood out to me, a few things, but one thing that I want to bring up here is that there's something that happens when that narrative when we deal with tokenism and just those selected few people who are studied and are checked out. I mean, you talk about Mary Lou Williams, who was pretty much the matriarch of a scene. I mean, you talk about Monk. She bathed Bud Powell and looked out for him. Lord knows he might not have been alive as long as he was, if not for her. But you also mentioned in your book that she was never viewed as an innovator of the style. So could you all speak to what the result of that creates an invisibility of these people who, Black women, right? Who have done so much, not just in activism, but also in inspiring musicians who we consider are innovators of styles, and that we put on a pedestal.
Yeah, and just another way of putting this too is Jerome and I have been like, why didn't we learn that? How is it that you can get through a jazz program and not learn certain things? And Samora, like you're at Harvard, like I'm just curious. And Mimi, like you've had your own education both in through school, like the formal institutions, but also I'm gonna just say that you've had an education outside. Like, you can correct me there. So this just question of like, how did we miss this is something we've been talking about, like, so just your thoughts.
Yeah, I guess I'll try to maybe bridge, just because I had some thoughts about what we were just talking about and then going into this, which is one way I do think maybe a more hopeful way to frame uh the realities of what we are talking about, is that I do think that those folks are available and doing things, or those type of folks, the same as we talk about in the past, are doing very exciting work right now. And I actually think if we broaden our concept of what is jazz beyond music, we find so many dope people. And that's something I've really been thinking about recently so much, because I actually think some of our greatest practitioners of the form are writers. So Saidiya Hartman to me is a jazz musician. Fred Moten is a jazz musician. Robin Kelly is definitely a jazz musician. He wrote the Monk biography. Shanna Redman, who wrote Anthem, about Black national anthems, is a jazz musician. And I've learned, to be honest, a lot more from them than I have from and a lot of other, from real, from records. I shouldn't say a lot more, as much. And I think that relationship is part of the relationship we're talking about, is that not only are we in conversation with other forms, practitioners of other forms and also organizers, but also that we have an understanding of the form that transcends just music. And as a result, we can actually learn and relearn what the form is. And that is so exciting to me. And that's where a lot of my deepest, both political and artistic friendships have actually come from, is actually not with musicians, but actually with writers or thinkers. And, that's obviously a privilege that I've been afforded. So I know that not everyone, we all have different access because of the luck of who we come into contact with as well. But as speaking, going on to that and going into the historical part, I definitely had the same question. I've had two different now universe or whatever, higher I don't know what even to call it anymore. Collegiate experiences. Very different, both considered, the bastion of the highest level of education or whatever. And there have been very, very beautiful parts of that, and there have been there have been parts of it that have shown me the belly of the beast as far as it goes to, you know, European settler colonialist mentality is the best way to actually put it, because it goes beyond America. Um, and the reason that I think that really foundationally we see all of this come together is that, and you guys kind of mentioned it by talking about, well, where does the toxic masculinity come from? I've been reading a lot of Bell Hooks, and in her book, she has a lot of books that talk about this, particularly a book I'm reading right now called We Real Cool. She talks about how the versions of patriarchy and misogyny, masculinity, really, that we kind of all exist inside of as men in the current day, have direct origins in white settler colonialism, actually. And so there's actually a connect between white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy, what I call racial gender capitalism. And so as a result, I think that seeps into all the different aspects. And for instance, that I think is why in any reading of any history, the most marginalized, the most oppressed will always be left out of that history. So in the format of creative improvised music, or black music, jazz music, whatever you want to call it, that's already a black music. Like, you can't erase black people from that music because it is us. Ain't nobody else if you're gonna erase us. But because it has been dominated by men mostly, it is possible when telling the history to erase the very important contributions, as you said, of women, of queer folks. I mean, to me, my favorite composer of all time is Billy Strayhorn. And I think there's a reason that he's not taught as much as he needs to be taught as well. So I would question that as well, in the same breath that I would question, as you mentioned, Mary Lou Williams and Hazel Scott. And I mean, all these amazing, brilliant, folks, particularly women who are not singers, right? Because so often the women can be relegated to only voices. And when we know there's so many brilliant folks on all instruments. So yeah, I mean, it's in all the things, but I think I'm very excited about what is in the air right now. So I think we're moving to the next place, but maybe that's just me.
I just and thank you for that. I really do agree with like everything you guys are saying. Something just to your question, Naomi, like a little hardened. So like, Louis Armstrong was one of the most famous jazz musicians ever. And you don't hear so much about Lil, it's like she was a great pianist too. You know what I mean? And I'm sure she had to make sure that things were tight, things were working right so that her husband could do what it is he does. And it's like a double duty, and as a black woman, unless you are one, there's like that legacy that you kind of come up in of like, you got to take care of your family. And I think because of slavery, you're not adored as much. It's like the equal kind of situation in a sense. I'm picking cotton, you picking it too. So, it's not like this mystic situation of like, wow, I mean, when I look at you guys as a couple, I love seeing you guys because Naomi, Jerome always talks highly about you, like you're his queen. But for so many black women, that they should, for what they put into it, myself, one, I know how hard I work, my mom, I watched my aunts carrying things, really making sure that household was tight. Unless you're loud about it, unless you have a big voice to say I'm so and so, and then those women get knocked down too, because don't be too loud. I forgot the famous comedian back in the day. Damn, uh and she was a lesbian woman. It's like you'll get a bad name for that. So it's like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And I just want to throw this out. I'm sorry if my ideas just sound like unconnected, but like Miss Tammy, like you are amazing. And I get when you say, I don't want to be looked at as a doctor right now because we just chilling. But I feel, and I'm not creating anything between us, but I feel that it's important that people know you're a doctor because there are not enough doctors that look like you. You know what I mean? And so in Berkeley, and that's why I'm like Mimi Jones right here, because I feel like you right now. In Berkeley, I tell my students I'm Professor Jones. Do not call me Mimi, because already the level just goes, and it's so easy for other cultures to like wear their accomplishments. Yes, I am a doctor, I am esquire, lawyer, so and so. They put it on their license plate. I feel like as Black people and as Black women, there's this thing where it's not cool to wear your crown, and we should be wearing it. We work so hard for it. You know how hard that was to get from here to there? And it's not the work. It's not that anyone's lazy. It's not that anyone's incapable of, learning the script, but just the doors that don't actually open when you have your stuff and you're ready to go. And it's like, well, that's a real thing. So we just met, Tammy, and I'm ready to read your book. I wrote it down. I'm excited because you never know who's looking at you from across wherever, like just having a hard time, and they're like, "Damn, she did okay. It's game on." So I just wanted to
So
to
I
add.
received that, sister, but also can I say, first of all, Jerome, thank you for thinking of my book that way. But when I was asked to be on this panel and I did the research, first of all, I was so impressed with you too, Samora and Mimi. But Mimi, when I saw that you had created your own record company, I was like, yes, that's what I'm talking about. Because you're operating in the same paradigm that Mary Lou Williams did. When Mary Lou Williams took that turn with her music and her religious music in the 60s and 70s, she knew the industry was not going to cooperate with her, right? So she didn't go to Blue Note. She didn't go to Impulse. She went to Smithsonian Folkways. She knew Mo Ash. She knew Mo Ash was releasing all of this, material that just really wouldn't have been embraced by, the traditional jazz infrastructure. And he gave her her own imprint. And she started her own publishing company. And I look at Alice Coltrane. When Alice Coltrane decided to sever her ties with Warner Brothers, and she went into her ashram and began to do her devotional music, she set up her own record company, Avatar Books, that released her music and it released her personal writings. And when I saw that, I was like, I wonder if this sister knows that she is a part of a continuum of Black women making a way out of no way, of saying, I'm not going to necessarily wait for you to acknowledge me, but I'm going to put a mechanism in place where I can fully realize my music in a living space, because music is meant to be heard and played and performed, not just written on pieces of paper and whatever. It's meant to live, right? And so, you are part of a continuum. And I say this because now you provide me an example in my jazz history class to say, these are modern connotations, because those are the things I'm looking at to embed. And I will tell you all something. I was convicted in my spirit about 10 years ago from a student in my class, because I used to do these separate women in jazz units, right, throughout. And this student said to me, you are not doing these women any service. You need to integrate them into the conversations and stop pulling them out. So I teach Leo Harton beside Lewis. Now I teach Melba Liston in the same unit that I teach Dizzy Gillespie, so that you understand that Melba Liston is who shaped Dizzy Gillespie's sound of his State Department orchestra in 1952, 53, 54. I teach Alice Coltrane in a whole unit with John. I don't separate, because what we need to do, until we start to do that, until we start to say those names together, until we start to realize that that history is not a separate history, we'll continue these two different lines and paradigms. And so, like what Jerome was saying, then we'll never have these integrated narratives. And I so appreciate you saying that about my book, Jerome, because when I set out to write that book, my whole pathway as a jazz scholar was about who I wasn't reading about and who I wasn't hearing in the classroom. Because when I sat in the classrooms that I was in, largely as the only Black student in graduate school, now I went to a HBCU undergrad. So I was surrounded by, Black excellence, these stories and musicians that were out of, but when I went to graduate school and I sat in those classrooms and I did not hear Black names mentioned and I didn't hear women's names mentioned, I kept questioning why. And that's the thing. We have to raise these questions. I challenge my students to say, who am I not hearing? Who am I not reading about? And that's just a basic question to say, you know what? So who else would have played in this time except for Miles Davis? Nothing wrong with Miles. Who else was playing when Charlie Parker was playing, right? Like, and I think those are the things that get us to a point where we can stop having these separate conversations, and we don't necessarily have to feel like women are added to the narrative in a token kind of way.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, snaps. And Mimi, quickly, I want to just shout out too that I really appreciate you calling out the kind of, like, one thing that we don't talk a lot about is like what the wives, of jazz musicians are up to, and kind of calling out that labor. And, when you said, unless if folks are loud, then they don't get, I thought, I'm loud. Jerome can do.
But you have to be. But that's just our society in general. I mean, yeah. Barbara Ransby has wrote an amazing book called Eslanda that deals with Eslanda Robeson, Paul Robeson's wife. She was almost like the coal to his engine, but we don't know anything about her.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sorry that y'all got to be that way, but go ahead, babe.
I wanted to ask Samora a question, because yes, we're calling out, I think, in a really productive way, some of the issues, but I also hear solutions. I hear strategies also. And Samora, so over the summer, there was a lot going on. And one of the things that you did was start a book club. And so I really would love for you to talk about that, talk about why you did it, just what that space can offer to the jazz community, to folks in general.
Yeah, it was a beautiful experiment. I love that. I call everything beautiful experiments now, but that's totally giving it up. I actually get that from Miriam Kava, the abolitionist, who says that's what we need in every sector. We need a million beautiful tiny experiments, and I just love that so much. So this is one of my experiments, and it was inspired by many other book clubs. I know you guys did a book club. And obviously, one of the primary examples that I was very inspired by was No Name's book club. And No Name has been an amazing, just source of inspiration and information in the past few months. So, for me, it was the reason I tried to start it was for a few different reasons. One was just to create community and just like meet some new folks and have a real space around which we could actually connect in like a more meaningful way than online or just like in 3 seconds. And that would maybe like expand past my normal, folks that I'm close to. And the other one was to challenge myself, number one, to actually, if you're reading with others, it means you got to finish the book because you're like, I need something to say. I need to know what I'm talking about. So it kept me like really like scheduled to actually do the reading, which, lots of us have a lot going on, to be real. And also it made me think, well, here's a space where I have to wrestle with some questions that I'm dealing with as I also educate myself. But also, if I wanted only to educate myself, I could just read the book. But the point of the book club was also to not only read the book together, but to discuss it together. And hopefully through that process to open up a space where we could have some like, complicated discussions and honest discussions about, our lives, and use the book as a portal of sorts to go into some different things. We started with this book, How We Get Free, which is a book by Kianga Yamada Taylor that is centered around the Combahee River Collective statement, and then also features interviews with some of the founders of the collective. And that book, it really, changed my life as books do. So, it was really amazing to read that book. And then we started We Real Cool. And then, to be honest, it became the school year, and I was like, I have 20 books to read now, so I cannot lead this anymore. But while it lasted, it was a beautiful space. It was also a complicated space, to be honest. And I do think that it's an incredible trust element, to bring people even into a Zoom space, particularly where we are trying to be honest with one another, where we're particularly tackling books that have to do with certain topics, and particularly where we're trying to engage with those topics head on. I think there's the risk of people performing a certain level of solidarity or understanding and then not practicing that. And I think that that's one of the hardest things to really gauge in the space. And you can't really control that. But I do urge people that engage in whatever way, not to just like read a thing to talk about it, but to really like figure out what are the ways we can hold ourselves accountable to the text. What are the ways that we can like critique ourselves and hold ourselves to task based on these things that we're learning as we're reading.
Yeah, thank you. And I think about, now we still need those spaces, and, what are the ways that we can come together? Because sustainability with our book club was hard too. We started with making all Black Lives Matter, and then we did, I don't
We
even
did it
remember.
combined.
We did the combine,
yeah.
but, and, just sustainability was an issue for us too. And so
So
if we're talking about, going back to what Tammy was saying about salons and creating these spaces, I'm also just want to throw out as another strategy would be collaboration, cooperation among us who have this interest and this drive to do that. So I was really, really excited about that.
if I could add one thing too, is
Yeah.
I do think that there are space, just like there are relationships that are come into your life for a particular point in time in your life, and then maybe you move into a different time and that relationship is not needed, and then there are those relationships that last a lifetime. I think spaces can be like that, and communities can be like that as well. And that being said, as you move through different spaces, you have to treat them all with the same level of care. But I do think that there's nothing wrong with having some spaces that exist for a particular time and space, and then they dissipate. But it's important to know the difference between those spaces and the spaces that you can really sink roots into and build with, because it is really two different things.
Okay.
No, there's something that you said, Samora, that spoke to me about not just, or was that Tammy? Not just, well, yeah, that was you, Samora. Not just reading the text or knowing the buzzwords, intersectionality,
Yeah.
We saw a
and
lot of
toxic
that
masculinity, and I'm an ally, and these, but living it, right? And when you see something going wrong, or having, being about whatever it is to stop it, or when, in spaces where, there was a white group that wanted to start a book club, and we felt that, yeah, you all should have your own space to do that, right? um I want to ask you all a question just regarding how moving forward should we address these certain ills within, when we talk about jazz, gender, and the music, and who's left out and who's not, and how do we address these different things,
And
ills?
yeah, and also I just want to kind of, before we get to that, just call out what Samora was saying, because I just think it's so important. What happened over the summer? Like what happened over the summer? Because we're in a different place now, and I want to also just dig deep and say social media has a really interesting way of circulating knowledge and information. And so we saw all kinds of organizations crop up over the summer where the folks behind these organizations, it was not transparent within the jazz community
right.
and outside, that were kind of recycling kind of Black feminism in ways that were deeply problematic. Okay, so let's just like let's get to the nitty gritty of this too. So at the same time, groups can have a purpose, right? We can have like a one-off, and we can also have like those longer term engagements. But I really think we need to have a really critical discussion about what it means to do that work, and what does it look like if you just show up once. You take some buzz terms, you read like a line of Tony Cupcake Bambara, throw it on your website. Don't look at what any of folks have done before, right? Don't engage with community, and then call yourself a Black liberation, a Black liberation group in jazz, right? So I want to call that out very clearly, because we have seen that happen in multiple ways. We've seen these groups kind of impacted by misogyny. We've seen these groups impacted by racism.
By racism.
And
yeah.
I think that needs to be said, and that I think there's some deeper thinking that needs to be done around how we are in community with each other. But I want to go back to Jerome's question. I'm sorry that was a rant, but this is really the panel where I feel like we can lay it all out. Because as Tammy, you mentioned, when we separate these things, like gender, this space, I feel like you all are so equipped to talk about all of it or more of it.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of bring those to
and
the
bring
forefront.
And Mimi, you've been on the scene. Bring everything to this. Like you have played with the greats. You are one of the greats. Bring it. Like this is something. I mean, we've got organizations that are fronting on Instagram that are actually that are posing Black, that are actually ran by white folks heading. Let's talk about these things.
That's real.
Let's fix it.
Well, maybe not fix it, but let's at least start a conversation.
You all are getting into something I really didn't know about, but I will say, I mean, you do.
I got comments on this.
What we do see is a lot of performative activism. It is vogue now to be woke. And I'm about tired of the term woke, because it did mean something at one point in time, and now it's been co-opted and commodified in such a way, right, that it in some ways it does become performative. There's no substance, right? And I think the real key to rooting out some of this stuff is really looking to see what people offer as strategies, and what are real tangible I should say manageable goals, right? Not just simply philosophizing, but if someone says that they are really launching an initiative, if they have measurable goals that you can see, then I think that's when you give those people space to show you what they're about, but everyone, for a period in time, that everyone had a Black Lives Matter statement, to the point that it diluted the very fact that people were putting them out. Now, I never questioned whether people were being legitimate in their real pronunciation or support of Black Lives Matter. What I've done is just sit back and watch who is really doing something from a corporate standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, because people can put out statements all day long. But do you have some real, tangible, programmatic, structural strategies, devices, right? That we can really see you engaging with people, you're making things happen, you're making change happen, right? I watched it from the places where I buy my goods to to what I give my money to, what charity things I give them. So it's I think it's really about we giving these people the ample opportunity to sink themselves, or to be revealed for who they are. But I'd like to know who y'all talking about, because I
Yeah, I'm learning too. I'm like, damn, who did that?
think I got a feeling, but
That is ratchet. I was gonna say, because you threw out a lot of different. I'm like, whoa, which one should I go with? But in terms of solution, one of the things that I'm trying to become active in, and it kind of hit me on the road a year and a half ago. I was out with a Tia Fuller band, and there was a band before us, and we got there early. Just to make a long story short, I was practicing backstage, and one of the band members came, a man, a white man, European, and he just took it upon himself to talk about Tia to me like she was a sexual object. Also, and not adornment, but like kind of like just, ooh, Tia Fuller, she's so, you know, and then question me why I was practicing the chromatic scale. Don't I know more? Why don't I play something for him? How did I get this gig? He's never heard about me. We basically went on stage and killed it, and it was just a trio. They were a big band that was shut down. I didn't see him. I was looking out to see if I saw he was gone. But I said in that moment, I got to come up with some phrases that are quick, because I'm not quick like that. You know how some people got that thing, not where you're necessary sarcastic. Sometimes you need a little sarcasm to like break the bang, bonk them on the head, but we're really doing it out of love and like, I'm going to educate you right now, not because I think you're rude and obnoxious and just, who told you you could speak to me, period. At that moment, I didn't come to you when you were in your practice room warming up, but just where you take initiative to educate someone and say, that that felt really uncomfortable when you said that. Is that how you speak to the women that you love in your life? Or, I think if I would have came to you and did that, you would have questioned, or you would have called security, or, you shouldn't do that. And so since then I've been being more vocal about like what doesn't work. And I'm bringing that up to say too, not for my sake, but for the person who called me, I'm going to leave the organization out, the name anonymous, but it's an organization that we all know and we're all like, yay, jazz, they're the best. And they function under a corporate umbrella. We basically love them and we're proud. But behind the scenes, it's some real bullshit. It's shady. It's like, you're not going to take care of your women? Wait, I don't even see any. Wait, okay, I see a couple, and they were not taking care of them. And if the public knew that, I think it would kind of shut them down in a way. Also just the whole, not to bring in the Me Too thing, because I don't ring those bells unless, I'm clear about something and there's a reason. I'm not one of those individuals who are like, just get a kick out of taking down men, especially my brothers. That's not, but I think it is important to educate. Even in my household, I might say, did you know such and such? Like, wait, you got paid a certain amount, and I did the same thing. And it's like, oh shoot, for real? No, you should have got. And I'm like, damn, that is wrong. So, it's important to take that next step and not feel like, well, I don't want to lose this gig or I'm gonna look a certain way, and be like, that's not cool. We got to change that. You might have made a mistake in counting, or whatever the thing is, to say, I need health insurance as well. I can get sick. I'm not just here. Yeah, sometimes it feels very fearful to speak up for yourself amongst someone who, hired you or is in control of your check, or, you don't want to get a bad name. You don't want to look like a bitch. You don't want to, there's so many. So you're trying to be good, but a lot of these things, these systems need to be broken down, and rewritten in a proper way. And so, I'm for, in a loving, respectful way, let's reteach, let's redo this system. Even the way some people speak, oh, this chick could play, and I'm also not about, like, if you're having fun, you're in a certain setting, oh, don't say that, because you kind of got to know who you're with and who you're amongst, and you make a choice as an individual. Well, I know if I go out with that cat, they just gonna be in the gutter all day, and that might be okay. You might be all right with that. So then, I'm not going to turn around and be like, don't talk about that in front of me, because I know who I'm with. There's like a double standard. I don't want the guys to feel like they're handcuffed, but it is important, because I hear this from my friends who are guys who were ratchet women. They have daughters now, and they're like, damn, I would be so hurt if somebody treated my daughter the way I treated, but it's like something we need to rewrite, so it's not uncomfortable. Like, you shouldn't even be thinking that. I mean, there's the natural thing, you see someone, you undress them, you're attracted, but then you kind of gotta, be mindful of what you're saying. Don't be backstage talking about you want to lick my toes before I'm about to take my solo. That's kind of gonna throw me off, like, it's just, so I just think it's really important, and that could be somebody that you looked up to. There are a lot of those, I missed out on tons of private lessons because I was just like, nah, ugh, no, 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 no. But, real talk, I think we're at a time, like you said, COVID just opened the floodgates for these things to be addressed, and we do need to find kind of positive ways, because we don't want to walk around angry. I know Black people, and I'm just going to say this and then I'll shut up for a minute. We're angry because it keeps happening. So, like, if these killings happened and it was like, okay, that was back when we learned, now we got it, right? It's like every 6 seconds, and you're only hearing about some of them. So, you know, how can you rest? You know what I mean? It's not a fad. It's not it's not vogue for us. It's scary. You get pulled over and you're shook. You're like, ah, damn, like, where you put your hands at? Like, damn, did I pay my okay. I think I said a lot.
Thank you.
No, I mean, thank you, Mimi. You talk about that fear, and we talk about jazz and gender. There's two genders, as far as male and female, and then there's, other pronouns people go about. We have to look out for each other and stand in solidarity with each other. If I see something that happens foul to you, I need to say something, even though it's not happening to me, right? And that's what solidarity is about. Yeah. So, Samora, did you want to jump in here, man?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, and I mean, I want to honor what what Mimi has just said, and part of what I also heard in that too, which I think is it's the case in the context of what we're talking about, but also in general, is that part of what she speaks to is this, that I'm becoming very conscious of. I mean, I've been conscious of it before, but I haven't necessarily had the language for it. Is this space that particularly it seems Black women are caught in between, where on the one hand, I think women in a lot of these situations as well in general, is that on the one hand, there's conduct that is just not acceptable by any stretch of the imagination, and that is creating a power dynamic off top, and that is just, as a result, it should just not happen. And so you want to, you're being affected by all of that. And then on the other hand, you have to live in the world every day, in a world that does this to you all the time. And so as a result, you're having to manage the ways in which you confront it, right? And also you're having to manage the ways in which you confront the multiplicities of your identity. I mean, this is where, with the Combahee Collective, the original concept of identity politics is so strong, because, you're dealing with the realities of, all of us are dealing with the realities of the multiplicities of our experiences, the identities we ascribe to ourselves, but also that are ascribed upon us. And as a result, for instance, for a lot of Black women, on the one hand, there's a lot of conduct by Black men that is unacceptable. And yet at the very same time, you do not want to play into any situation in which you are criticizing them because of white supremacy, And so you're in this double bind where you're like, well, this is unacceptable. And also this is not this is equally or even more unacceptable. And so, the solution to that is, to me, is to have a very complicated set of responses to different situations and contexts, but also to never allow a situation. To me, it always comes back to power. So the question is, in whatever situation you're in, are you in the presence of a situation in which power is being exerted unfairly, and you're not stepping inside to do something about it? If you're there, you know what I mean? And it could be an innocuous thing, as you're talking about, but regardless of how innocuous it might be, whether it's an offhand comment or a context that we just happen upon every day, when you understand that that's undergirded and like held together by a power dynamic that is in the air and also in the body, you can't like pretend that that's not something bigger than just that small thing, and that it's not having an effect that's bigger than that small thing. And as a result, you can't just treat it like it's that. So for me, that's what it comes down to in that context. In terms of the organizational thing around people, you know, um, co-opting language, et cetera, et cetera. This is where, and I don't want to go onto my soapbox too much, but number one, I always start in this context with a real analysis, for me, comes of capitalism, because the way that capitalism works is that it eats everything. So it's like whatever word, whatever thing that exists that is good or bad or anything that somebody can profit off of, it's gonna get profited off of, right? So any term is gonna get turned around and be co-opted. Any space is that's gonna happen to it. So we have to be able to tell the difference between uh, spaces that in which people are existing, whether it's intentional or not, that the space is engaging with that co-optation versus spaces where they're on the ground, like Professor Kernodle said, dealing with the issues, right? Number two, to me, I think as a part of capitalism and celebrity culture that we exist in, it can be very seducing to want to be seen, be seen doing a thing. And it's even something I even fall into, where I want, even when I'm doing things, it's like if somebody doesn't see that I'm doing the thing, it's like if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? Like somebody doesn't see that I'm doing this thing. Am I doing it? It's like, no, you're doing it, man. Like, who cares? But there is this thing. And as a result, I think a lot of times people start organizations when they should just join organizations. You know what I mean? It's like Dream Defenders exists. Movement for Black Lives exists.
Are we talking about Ice Cube? Just,
I mean, listen, yeah, that's a real combo too, but that's part and parcel too. I mean, yeah, it's just been so disappointing to see, but sadly predictable. And no coincidence that, again, I think this is a perfect way to see how intertwined the systems are, because no coincidence that Ice Cube, in addition to being a man, also has a lot of money and also played a cop in hella movies. And I don't care if he made, F the police. He turned around and played a cop in a bunch of movies. So he's clearly not an abolitionist. It's like, so I just really think that this is where you see that all these systems are intertwined. And yeah, we just got to know, like, this is, as I said, just don't, it's better not to invest in celebrities of any kind or even individuals. Just believe in your people and believe in organizations that prove to you over and over again that they will stand for the people at every turn.
Amen.
Tammy, you want to go? Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm just gonna say amen, because they both said it all right there. Amen. Amen.
Yeah, well, so this has been such a rich discussion, and one of the things that in my conversations with folks in the jazz community starting to organize, that I've really thought a lot about, is just that organizing is a skill, it's work, and as Samora has said, there are organizations sometimes that people should join instead of starting their own. And so how do we have respect for that kind of the long struggle, right? And not just the quick fix. How do we start to have conversations about misogynoir? How do we talk about like gender and how do we talk about sexism in terms that aren't just about white women? Right? How do we talk about sexism in a way that holds Black men accountable? We're not going to answer all these questions here because this is like the long struggle, right? But I feel like it's been so great to be in conversation with you all, because and energizing and just so thoughtful to at least begin to have these really honest and productive conversations. I'm really, really, I feel hopeful. And so we just want to close with a question that we asked at our last panel. And Samora, you brought up freedom dreaming. So we just wanted to take this moment to dream a little bit and ask you, like, what are your dreams when it comes to thinking about how you would like to see change? What's your dream? What are the visions that you're hoping for?
For me, it's revolution. It's revolution, and I've been thinking a lot about it. I don't know how we get there, but it's revolution and it's abolition. And for me, abolition is such a beautiful idea because of two things. Number one, it exists in the context of systems, but also in the context of ideas. So there are systems like policing and prisons that I do believe we need to abolish, but there are also there are ideologies as well that we can abolish as a part of that revolution that includes abolishing these systems, and those things are intertwined. That's so exciting to me. So I think that as we work to abolish these systems, we're also working to abolish the ideologies at the same time. Um, the other thing that's exciting to me is that it's always thrown in terms of destruction when people talk about abolition or even revolution, because people are scared of what that will look like. But there's a creative aspect to it, particularly as an artist, that I'm so drawn to, when we are able to think, as you said, to freedom dream. And the freedom dream, not only, I think a lot of times when we think about, like, particularly with young folks, and I think this is such a disservice to how we teach young people the freedom dream, is that a lot of times it's indicative of how we teach them, in that if you were to ask them, and definitely if you were to ask me when I was younger, I would answer that by all the things I don't want, but I wouldn't have no answers for what I want. So I would say, I don't want racism, I don't want sex, and of course we don't want those things. But what's so beautiful as you continue to do, read abolitionist work and do all this research, is that you find there, again, to come back to this beautiful experiments idea. There are so many beautiful experiments that people are undergoing to try to look at what are the different ways that we can heal each other? What are the different ways that we can participate in taking care of each other that doesn't look like punishment? What are the ways in which we can relate to each other in ways where we hold ourselves accountable for all the things we've been taught and then purge ourselves of those ideas. So it's like hard work. Like it's really hard every day, and it's not always fun, but it's actually really beautiful because it is creative. And just like jazz music, it's done socially, like between people, and it's also like it goes beyond the realm of the known. And that's like that's just, that's what I love about what we do. So yeah, that's what I would say. I hope that's specific.
Thank you.
So mine would be of shifting paradigms, and I'm coming from the standpoint of an educator and as a scholar. And so my freedom dream is to shift the paradigm, and what I mean by that is that what I want to do is normalize and reclaim people from the margins and their stories and those narratives. And so, I don't do marching. I don't do screaming. What I do is in the classroom is that I play what you don't expect to hear. I talk about what you don't expect to know. And as a scholar, I write what isn't there. So I feel like my activism, and if I can borrow your words some more, revolution is a part of a collective revolution of other scholars and educators who are trying to empower the next generation, because the people who sit at my feet and oftentimes in my classroom don't look like me. But I know that in those moments that I have them for 12 weeks or 16 weeks, or sometimes for 4 years, because they come back to study more Black music with me, then I know that I'm sending them out. I hope that I'm sending them out in a world where they will have a consciousness about Black people. And so I've started to boldly say to people, you cannot like Black culture and not love Black people. If that's what you're doing, then what you're doing is you're doing no different from all of the other agents who have simply consumed and destroyed. And so I tell my students, you cannot say you like rap music or jazz or R&B and not have a consciousness about Black people, because our culture cannot be separated from who we are and what our struggles are and our lived experiences, you know. And so, you know what, I've also decided when I go into spaces, in order to bring these stories and names into places, my new point of activism is that I'm going to start wearing name tags. And on my name tag, I'm going to say, hello, my name is Sandra Bland. Hello, my name is Breonna Taylor. Because I go into a lot of spaces where I'm the only Black woman. And what I want them to understand is that my PhD and my writings and all that I have done have made me no different from those women. And so if you cannot see me in those women, then there is a problem. That I want you to understand that I am she and she is me. And so that's the kind of revolution and paradigm shifting that I'm trying to get people who say that, oh, we're happy to have you here and we're happy to have your voice, to know that my experience is the same as these other women and these Black men who've lost their lives.
Mm, that is so powerful. The both of you. Um, just to add to that, I think well, 2 points. One is that empathy that is missing. I see a world, and I don't feel like it's impossible, where even if you haven't experienced it, you give the space, the bandwidth for a person to go through what they need to go through and get it together. You don't just outcast them because they've been through something, and you might not know how hard that is to make that comeback. You're like, yeah, you did it, you accomplished all this stuff, but to really I mean, you look at LeBron James. I mean, I can tell he's seen hurt. You know what I mean? But we're like, yay, LeBron, you're gonna score those points, all of that. He did so well. But to really, put yourself in that space to a place where you can't even imagine and give the respect that's due, give the support that's needed to people like that, male, female, any gender that you are, understand that like a lot of queer people have been abused for years, beat up, called out, just treated so badly to the point where aggression is part of your everyday thing, defense, because you have to defend yourself and you're afraid to be you. A place where people it's not about that. They're focusing on the beauty, the soul, what you have to give to, humanity. I mean, there are great people that come out of the freaking projects that make moves that are like, what? Where'd you come from? Well, don't say you came out no, like people are people, and so the other thing I really want to see, and I feel like that can happen as well, but like Samora said, we got to study, we got to practice, we got to be disciplined about teaching, listening, learning, preaching, that we don't have to have a women in jazz festival because there are tons of women on all the festivals. It's not, or this is a, cross gender because we have to feed, we don't need all that. I know I personally, I'm proud to be a woman, but it's not every day that I just want to be called out. I want to just play bass, or whatever it is. You just jam into my song. You're not looking to see who this person is, and I just think the dream world would be where we would learn so much. And the other thing is age, discrimination to age. Oh, I can't listen to you because I'm so and so. There's a lot of young minds that are like, and our older people, 50 plus, 45 and up, need to listen to some of these young scholars. And I mean, there are young ones that are really preaching. And then, like I said earlier, the reverse, the young people really, really adoring and the experience that these elders have gone through and the challenge. Again, they didn't go through that, but understanding them having that empathy and openness to just see what they're talking about might help them, might give them a certain strength that you can't get from a book or online or watching a video. So like, I just think we need to kind of come together in these lines. People need to be respected for who they are and what they've done, and specifically Black people need to embrace their great legacy, because we are taught to put that it's wrong for us to be like, this was something amazing, we did something great, and it's just, always a fight. You know what I'm saying? Right now I'm working on a piece and it deals with this orchestra that I do called the Dome Experience. And I have a problem with the way the Asians were treated during this whole pandemic. And I'm like, so it's basically the same thing that Black people, it's like you just get this whole thing pinned on you, and people were getting beat up that are actually Americans. It's mind-boggling. So just if we could get to a place where you just have respect for a person because they are human, they may save your life. So
Yeah, well, on that note, Mimi, we really appreciate what all of you have said tonight. It's a very thoughtful, rich, and optimistic view. I mean, that what you all have contributed to this Jazz and Gender panel has been amazing. And again, we want to thank the National Jazz Museum in Harlem for sponsoring these discussions. And
yeah, thank you.
If I could say one last thing, I would just like to appreciate both of you and to say that you know, Naomi, the first time that I met you, you know, was through this teaching program that I was doing, and you came and exactly what, you know, Tammy's talking about, you did to that room. Like, you transformed that room, gave everybody the real info that, you know, they needed, and I could see what was going on. And I was like, I had been in that program for 3 years. Nothing like that had ever happened. So, you know, you're really truly doing the work. And Jerome, you know, your last record, I think, is proof positive of the soul work and the communication work that we as men need to be doing. And it's also just an excellent artistic project. So appreciate both of you guys. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, same thing back to y'all are inspiring. All right. I don't want to keep you. I could go on with the love fest like all night.
yes.
Keep doing what you all doing. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tammy.
Thank you so much for
stay
being here.
well.
Thanks, Mimi. Samora, y'all take care.
Guys. Thank you,
Appreciate
Tammy.
you.
Thanks,
Y'all take
Samora.
care.
Love you
Pleasure.
guys.
Be good.